Heavy snowfall on the key N3 route linking Johannesburg and Durban has raised questions over the readiness of South Africa's disaster management. Professor Tafadzwanashe Mabhaudhi is a professor of climate change, food systems and health with the London School of Hygiene and honorary professor with the University of KZN. Joins me now for a further discussion. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. It would seem, certainly, observing what has been happening over the past few months and a couple of years, that KwaZulu-Natal in particular is prone to these extreme weather conditions.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. KwaZulu-Natal is a climate hotspot. Mostly because of its geography, its location relative to the ocean, as well as the topography, the mountainous topography of the province. So that creates a lot of vulnerability, especially to things such as heavy rainfall, flash floods, and so forth.
Of course, the province has come for some criticism from people who say our disaster management system, especially in the province, does not at all take into account these extreme weather conditions, and by extension, of course, it gets to be caught napping, as it were.
I think it's more a national situation of our disaster management that is not adequately prepared, and then, of course, it cascades down to the provincial level and down to the local and district municipalities in terms of adequacy of preparation. And it's a matter of several factors. There is a lack of human resources in terms of capacity, people with the right skills being employed in disaster management. There's a lack of infrastructure to support those people. There's a lack of resources, financial resources, and equipment also to support those people. And then on the technical side, we do not have protocols and guidelines in terms of what are the appropriate measures, how do we respond when an early warning has been issued, at which category. So there's really a need to strengthen disaster management, not just in the province, but nationally through several interventions.
But what about, you're mentioning capacity issues, infrastructure issues, resource issues, but what about agility, given whatever resources and capacity they may have? Are they as agile as they should be, given all those limitations you just spoke of?
They're not agile, and partly because of the institutional bureaucracy around agility. I recall in 2022 during the April floods, and I was there at the command center, and there were issues of procurement just to get TLBs to go and start digging up where people were buried under. The person in charge of them could not release them without certain paperwork being done and so forth. So you've got these institutional bottlenecks that also impede on that agility, which is where I'm saying there needs to be clear protocol and guidelines that says when an alert of this nature has been escalated or issued, this is the protocol. These are the responsible people who need to act in this way at these particular times. And often that lacks. So people start calling and trying to find out things when the situation is now unfolding.
But Prof, are the necessary conversations taking place where it matters so that they can begin to address these situations? Because the situation, it would seem, is not going to get any better anytime soon.
So the conversations are taking place. Recently, we had the Deputy Minister having a conversation around early warning systems. I know at the provincial level, they recently had a preparedness meeting. Of course, then they were not looking at this snow. They were looking at, the upcoming rain season. But it's not so much the conversations, it's more the action that is lacking, and the resourcing, the finance, the people capabilities to really start taking preemptive and proactive action. So that's where we are lacking. We're having a lot of discussions, but we are not acting on the ground. We are not changing the situation on the ground, and we are not putting our money where our mouths are So at the end of the day, that's why we're always having these conversations where things happen and then people only act after a situation is unfolded, and we keep asking ourselves about our levels of preparedness.
I'm wondering to what extent those in charge actually, how much they understand of the nitty-gritty or the detail that has to be part of. I mean, listening to the MEC just now, a short while ago, where they were, praising, patting themselves on the back for a job well done, which may well be the situation, but I'm wondering whether there's an honest appraisal of the situation, which would then inform preparedness for the future.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question that you raised. There is always a need to conduct critical appraisal and reflection. Without pointing a finger anywhere, I think the realities on the ground sort of highlight that we are repeatedly caught behind, and our actions, like I said, are more responsive than proactive. We should have, because the warning was initially issued on Wednesday, the 18th of September, that there's going to be heavy snowfall and so forth. There should have been steps taken then to close the N3 in certain areas where we know that there is a risk to heavy snowfall, like Van Rynen's Pass, in Harrismith, and so forth. The road should have been closed. We should have broadcast the early warning, broadly through SMS, radio channels, through all sorts of media, to ensure that people who were planning trips would not travel, people who stay in those locations would prepare adequately. So there's a lot that could have been done proactively that could have prevented this from being a crisis where people then ended up being stranded on the N3. A life was lost due to hypothermia. So if we'd taken those proactive steps, we could have saved the situation. So I think that is where the department really needs to reflect and focus to say, how can we be more proactive in terms of our action? Yes, they can pat themselves in terms of how they've responded, but the real issue is being proactive so that you actually do not have to put in place any significant responses, because you'd have mitigated the situation.
Exactly, because as late as Saturday afternoon, there were still trucks going through, making the crisis even worse than it could have been, and no one was stopping them. In fact, the road where RMTC had just threw up, their hands in the air, hopelessly, saying, these trucks continue to go in, we try to stop them, but no one is listening. A situation like that should never have been allowed.
Yeah, so there should have been, enforced road closures, not asking people. It should be enforced. The road is closed, period. No one is going through. Also, we've got the issue of people not taking heed to these warnings, such that, even when they were asked, they did not comply. That raises issues or concerns around awareness, that our citizenry aware? Do they understand the implications, what it means when the South African Weather Service says we've issued a level 6 orange warning? What does it mean for them? What is the risk to their lives? Because by continuing to drive into these situations, they're basically putting themselves at risk in those situations. So there's a lack of awareness on the citizenry in general that we need to act on, so that we get people to understand and appreciate early warnings and respond to them effectively. But there's also a need for proper protocols and measures on the side of disaster management. And that needs to be coordinated across departments, so that the disaster management centers could have issued an instruction to road traffic management and all sorts of other entities to say, this is the situation, this is the protocol, you need to close the road on these sections and so forth. If traffic needs to be diverted, all of those actions should have been taken from Wednesday, when the warning was initially issued by the South African Weather Service, and then reflected and reviewed periodically as the warning was being also updated by the weather services.
Professor Mabhaudhi, thank you very much for your time and insights. Really appreciate it.